Hi, my name is Carol Ricard, and welcome to this episode of I Am Not Cancer. So, if you're tuning in live, um, it is 6 a.m. here in the States, and it is 11 o'clock over in the UK. And today, I was actually supposed to be joined and interviewing um, a woman who started this wonderful nonprofit called Cancer Pal. And at the last minute, she had an emergency come up. So I have just decided to go ahead and let's do this episode. And I'm going to try and keep it to the theme, and that was around family and what's a family to do, and really, how could you support a family member who is going through a cancer diagnosis. And so there are really a couple important first steps. And one of the things that I want to kind of explain is that cancer doesn't just impact the person that's diagnosed, right? Cancer actually ends up impacting everybody in the family. And I say that because it's really important to kind of do an internal check and to see what are your thoughts and feelings and how are you sort of reacting to this diagnosis. Now, so for me, the first time that I really had to deal with cancer, I was just 14 years old. And I overheard a conversation. Actually, I was getting ready to go walk the dog one morning. And as I walked down the hallway, I overheard a conversation and I didn't want to interrupt. It was my brother in law talking to my dad's nurse who was there kind of taking care of us. And my dad was a doctor. So when I say nurse, she wasn't there taking care of him. She actually worked for him. And my parents had gone out of town. In fact, I could tell you the exact date, although I don't know the number, but it was the Saturday before Christmas in 1976. So I just gave away why all of my hair is actually gray. But I stopped because I didn't want to interrupt. And as I stood there, I couldn't help but overhear the conversation that was going on. And I kind of figured out that really they were talking about Jenny, which was the nurse's name, selling her place. And I figured the two and two together and realized that my dad was going to die, that my dad had cancer. Now, here's the thing. I never told anybody what I discovered. In fact, I kind of did just the opposite. I started stealing alcohol and taking it to school. And here's the thing, we actually had a lot of alcohol because we had had this bar and restaurant. I loved it. It was called Ducey's and it was at Bass Lake, California. Now I knew why we ended up having to sell the place was because of my father's cancer. And so I'm not proud about those days, but that was my way of reacting as a 14-year-old, just sort of discovering that their parent not only had cancer, but actually, was going to die from cancer. Now, here's the thing. I stand here today in a very different place because, thank God, 30 years ago, my higher power put me to work in a psychiatric hospital. And I got to learn other ways of really managing life when it shows up unexpectedly. Um, and I really was one of the lucky ones because alcohol wasn't my tool. All right. So that for some people, you might find yourself, you know, going to some of these other fixes to help deal with the overwhelm. And if that's you, I just want you to know that, it's okay because that's where you are. But what I also need to let you know is that's not going to fix the problem. All right. Because here's the thing. And if you've watched my show, you know that I like to really teach people that life is like a bottle of root beer, right? We shake up, we actually are shaking up, and the pressure builds up inside. Now, what happens when you're drinking or maybe using food as one of your quick fixes, um, or quite honestly, just trying to avoid it? Two things. When we're using other things to sort of cover up how we're feeling, it's like taking this bottle that got shook up and putting it in the refrigerator, right? The problem is that this pressure doesn't go anywhere. It is just going to stay in there until you either explode, and that's where the anger and the frustration kind of comes out on other people, or you actually implode. And if you look at this bottle here, it's kind of a little deformed because what's happened is over the years, it's imploded. And that's what people do. So if you're a family member and you are actually trying to deal with and struggling with a loved one's cancer diagnosis, what I want you to do is just take a quick inventory, all right, and look at what are you doing to deal with this? Are you drinking more? Are you smoking more? Or do you notice that you're eating more, right? Because Oprah Winfrey was a great example. She had something pretty traumatic happen in her life as a child, and that was really how she came to use food. And so for many of us, food instead of alcohol became, the quick fix and the way that we sort of tried to find comfort. Um, and so that really is step one, is taking a look at what are you doing with all the thoughts and the feelings that are connected to that loved one's diagnosis. All right. And if you're drinking or using food, I want you to know that there's other ways that you can begin to sort of deal with this. One of the greatest tools that honestly you can kind of do it anywhere you are, as long as you have a piece of paper and a pen, something to write with, is simply what I call doing a brain dump. And a brain dump is when you take a piece of paper, you write it out, all right, and then you release it. So, actually, you know what I just realized? Let's go ahead and I want to write down these steps so that this way you can kind of keep track of things. So, I'm coming over here to the board, all right? And step number one, I'm going to call that step number one is to check your tools. What are you currently using right now as a way of trying to navigate and deal with all of the different emotions that you might be having? All right. Step number two is to begin to identify what those thoughts, feelings, emotions are. All right. Now, I was just talking about the brain dump, and the brain dump is this great tool that you can do. And it's simply taking a piece of paper, all right, writing on it. And you could start off by saying, Carol told me to go ahead and to do this, so whatever comes out, you just dump on the paper. Now, I don't want you to think about it too much, because when you think about it too much, then you tend to filter what it is that you're writing. What I want you to do is just let it go. Just let it go. Now, when you're done, and here's the thing, you could set a timer for 1 minute, you could set a timer for 5 minutes. If you have more time, set that time. But even if you just do 1 minute a day, all right, you're going to dump the thoughts and the feelings down on a piece of paper, all right? And then what I want you to do is don't read what it is that you just wrote down. Instead, what I want you to do is just rip it up. Either, rip it into little shreds. If you're outside, you want to burn it, be my guest. If you have a fire, actually, a fire is a great way of just sort of throwing it in there. Or if you have a shredder, you could actually put that in there. Or one last thing, I created a dump box. And so you are looking at a picture of my dump box. And what I would do is write my feelings on this paper and then fold it up and put it in the box. Now, here's the reason why a dump box works really well. All right. And that is because those thoughts and those feelings are just going to sort of bubble up. It just comes up and comes up and it comes up. And here's the trick. It could take over your mind, but by using the box, when the thought or the feeling comes up, what you end up doing is picturing the box and using the image so that the image sort of overpowers the thought or the feeling, if that makes sense. It's a really pretty powerful technique. Um, and here's the thing, maybe you have just so much thoughts and feelings that have built up and just up to here that you might need to do this brain dump a couple different times. All right. Now, here's one other sort of alternative on this strategy, and it honestly, it is great. Well, first, let me tell you the story how I came up with this, because I used to teach this to my patients. For 30 years, I worked in hospitals teaching people stress management and wellness skills. And, I had this one guy who was living with roommates. He was in what they call transitional housing. And that is when you go from being homeless to actually this in between step where you're kind of living with a bunch of people. And he had been a professional guy, an engineer, had lost his job, fell onto some really hard times, and actually found himself, homeless. And so he ended up in this transitional housing. One of the problems was that when he started to get stressed, all right, it would come out and it would build and build and build, and then it would end up coming out as anger. And he was cursing out his roommates. He was actually getting very irritated and very agitated, loud and aggressive. And honestly, he was at risk of being kicked out. And so he knew I had talked about and taught this brain dump technique. And so we were talking, and I said, John, instead of it coming out of your mouth, what I want you to do is write it down so that you get the level down to here so that it doesn't end up coming out your mouth. And I said, why aren't you doing that? Just put the anger on the paper instead of the words coming out of your mouth. Oh, I can't do that, Carol. And I was, what do you mean you can't do that? He says, I'm afraid they're going to read what I wrote. And I thought, you know what? He has a valid point. So I quickly grabbed a Sharpie, handed it to him, and I said, here, I want you to go in the bathroom. All right. I want you to take the Sharpie. I want you to dump your anger out on the toilet paper. All right. And then I want you to flush it. And two things. One, I promise you, nobody will ever read it. And two, it makes a really good visual, right? That image of just watching it go whoop. And the other thing is that it adds in the sound. so that you not only have the visual of seeing it just getting flushed away, but you also have the sound of having it get flushed away. So he came in the next morning, and he said, Carol, I tried it. And you know what? It worked. I was able to get through the whole night without raising my voice to anybody. And so that is the power. And again, just so you understand this, you know what? The emotions go like this. When you've just been told, that a family member has a diagnosis, it's not like it slowly sort of rises. It's like boom, it gets up to here. And we actually have to take the steps to begin to manage it. And managing it is, releasing it. And so one way that you can do that is using this tool I call the brain dump. All right. Now, here's the thing. If you're not good with words, I actually have a girlfriend who had lost her mom. Her mom actually had breast cancer. Interestingly enough, was diagnosed when she was 85 with breast cancer. And so ended up going through treatment and quite honestly did really well and was in remission. Um, Unfortunately, she had other health issues that a little later on in her life caused her to pass away. But my girlfriend was just really struggling. And she honestly, she didn't know what she was feeling. She was more one of these people. She was an in her head kind of intellectual analyzer woman. She didn't know what was going on in her heart, and so she wasn't real good with feelings. So what she ended up doing was just holding everything, and it would build up, build up, build up, build up, build up. But here's the thing, she wasn't an exploder, she was an imploder. And she would end up finding herself feeling more depressed. So I suggested to her one day, why don't you just take a piece of paper, right? I bought these markers for her. I actually went to the store, bought just a box of markers, and said, just pick a color and just scribble. All right. Just all I want you to do is just pick colors and just do scribbling. And at first she was hesitant, and it took a couple weeks, but finally, I got a phone call from her and she said, Carol, you know what? I thought you were full of shit, but actually I did it yesterday and I found it was really helpful. And just to show you, here's a couple pictures of what my girlfriend actually ended up giving to me so that I could share it with people so you could see these examples. And again, you're not thinking about it. You're actually just doing it, so that we're just trying to identify whatever they are, not think about them, and then just lower that level. So it gives you a little bit more breathing room. All right. Now, that's what you can do for you in sort of navigating this. Well, actually, there is one more step, and that is that I want to encourage you to instead focus of the cancer. What I want you to do is just stay focused on this person as well. All right. So that is step 3. And I'm going to say, focus on the positive outcome. So, I listen, I live everything that I love to teach people. And it probably was about 10 years ago when I was in this situation where I got a phone call from my sister. And it didn't have to do with cancer, but it had to do with a health emergency. And quite honestly, I got this phone call one Labor Day weekend that my niece was in the hospital and basically on life support. And I remember, instantly, well, one of the things was that she had ended up, using something at this music festival that she was at. And they think that was sort of what caused it. And I just remember immediately, instead of, picturing her laying in a hospital room, basically on life support because her kidney and her liver had completely shut down. What I pictured her was sitting up in a hospital bed talking to me. And I was asking her this question: what the hell were you thinking? Right? And that was the image that I focused on. And that's what I want to encourage you to do with your loved one is, not to focus on the cancer, not to focus on illness, but to actually focus on a time or an experience. Like create this image in your head of them well and it involving you, just like I did with my niece. All right. Because if you think about it, our brain, can't go into two different directions at the same time. And really, in a sense, if you think of our thoughts and our feelings as energy, right? Well, illness has one energy to it, while wellness has another energy to it. And so it's really kind of having this wellness anchor. In my book, I actually share about how you can create this anchor. You just take a picture of what it is. So if there's a trip or if it's a wedding coming up or whatever the event is, I think of it as a destination wellness, right? I call it the ticket to wellness. So where is it, in the future that you want to end up being and experiencing? And then take that little picture and put it on an index card and then end up just carrying it around with you. For me, I actually, my wellness goal, my wellness destination is that I am going back to climb Half Dome in Yosemite National Park. And here is a picture of my wellness anchor. And here is a better picture of Yosemite National Park. And what I want to do is climb again to the very tippy top of Half Dome. And so I'm going to have to be well in order to do that. All right. So those are the 3 steps. And I want to just kind of review what those are. Step 1, I want you to start paying and check your tools. Are you using unhealthy ways of dealing with your thoughts and the feelings that you're actually having about that loved one's diagnosis? Step number 2, begin to identify what those feelings are. And you're going to do that. You could use a brain dump and you could do it with words on a paper, or you can just do it simply with markers or crayons and just kind of doodling and scribbling and just kind of doing it that way. All right. And now here's the trick. You cannot do step 2 on a computer. It actually has to be coming out of into your hands. It has to come out of your fingers, because here's the thing. If this is my phone, all right, or let's just say this is my tablet, right? So if I'm pushing buttons on my tablet, my brain is not registering what exactly it is that I'm typing out. All it knows is that I'm pushing on a button. But very different that if I take my hand and I write the word out anger, or pissed off, my brain is connecting to what it is that I'm actually feeling. All right. So it has to be a pen and paper or markers or something like that. And then step number 3 is for you to actually focus on the positive outcome, not to focus on the cancer, but to really focus on, which I think of as focusing on the illness, but it's to focus on wellness. All right. Now, That brings us to one other area I wanted to talk about before we kind of wrap things up. And looking at the time, we have just about 5 minutes left. And what's really important is, as a loved one, is what do you say, right? What do you say to somebody? So, what I want to first do is start out with what you don't say to somebody. And what you don't say to somebody is, I'm sorry. Because here's the thing. Oh, when I would kind of mention my cancer diagnosis to people and they say, oh, I'm sorry. And you know what I would say to them is, I'm not. Um, because here's the thing I learned a long time ago. You can only be sorry for something that you are responsible for. And so you aren't responsible for this person's diagnosis. All right. But what I want you to say instead is, I'm saddened, or, that is just, I'm so sad to hear that for you, Carol. Or I'm saddened, that you have to go through this, or whatever that other feeling is. Because truthfully, the sorry word is here, but sort of below it is whatever the emotion or feeling, that is. Um, and it's kind of keeping the spotlight on you so that it's not on them. You know? So that's first thing to not say to somebody is, I'm sorry. So what do we say after that? Well, there are a couple things that you can say. And I'm actually going to have these on our website. So if you go to iamnotcancer.live, all right, there you will find a handout of the couple things that I'm about to say to you so that you can actually print this out and you don't have to rely just on your memory from this show. All right. So, what can you say to somebody? Well, first thing you can say, after, of course, acknowledging that, is to say, is there anything I can do to support you on this healing journey? Or is there anything I can do to help you in getting through this? Simple. You put it out there. You're putting it on the table that you want to be here. Or even just to say to somebody, I want to support you. So anything I can do, please let me know. I know for me, I ran into a coworker of mine in the hospital. And you know what? We were talking and I shared with her that I was going to be starting chemotherapy. And she said, Carol, if you need a ride, all right, I'm here. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And that's it. So it can be offering something really concrete, like a ride, or, going to a doctor's appointment with somebody, or it could just be offering, if you need somebody to talk to, I'm here for you. Believe it or not, we need to wrap up our show. I hope that I've done a fairly good job of standing in for my guest. My name's Carol Ricard, and I'll see you on the next episode.